My sister said I wasn't elegant enough to come to her engagement, so I showed up anyway through the service entrance. The security guard thought I was staff her fiancé's mother bribed a technician to ruin the night, and the guests laughed when I spilled champagne. They didn't know I owned the hotel. 2 hours later, I played her voice over the speakers, plotting to destroy my sister's future, and walked out as the entire room froze. I'm Clara Hayes, and this is how silence turned into justice with interest. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe /like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. I woke up to the faint buzz of my phone against the nightstand, the sound pulling me out of that heavy kind of sleep where you forget who you are for a second. The screen lit the room in a soft blue glow. A text from Lily. My thumb hesitated before opening it. Hey Clara, maybe it's better if you don't come to the engagement party. It's going to be really formal, and you'd feel out of place. For a moment, I just stared at the words, reading them twice to make sure I wasn't still half dreaming. You'd feel out of place. The words pressed down harder than they should have. My phone rang before I could think of what to do. Mom. Hey, sweetheart. Evelyn said, her voice slow, careful. The tone she used when she knew she was about to say something I wouldn't like. You know how Lily is. The Hunters are. Well, they're very particular people. She just doesn't want things to feel awkward. I stared out my window, watching the first stretch of sunlight spill across the Santa Monica skyline. I see, I said. She's under a lot of pressure, Mom continued, her voice lowering, as if anyone might overhear. Please don't make this harder for her. You can celebrate with us later after the party. I forced a small laugh. Sure, Mom. Whatever makes her happy. There was a short silence. I could hear her sigh, that long exhale of a woman caught between daughters. You know she doesn't mean it the wrong way, she offered weakly. I know I said, though I didn't. I should get ready for work. When I hung up, the quiet hit me like a weight. My apartment felt too big, too sterile. Clean lines, neutral tones. Everything I used to want when I thought success meant peace. On the wall above my desk hung the framed blueprint of Harbor Light Resorts, the company I'd built from scratch over the past 10 years. 14 hotels stretched along the West Coast, hundreds of employees. And somehow I was still too plain to fit in. I poured coffee black and bitter the way I liked it. The reflection in the kitchen window caught me. Hair pulled back in a simple bun, no makeup sweatshirt from college. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe I didn't fit into her world of champagne and diamonds, but the thought made me smirk. She said I wouldn't fit in. I whispered to the empty room. Maybe she's right. Or maybe she just doesn't know where she's standing. I sat at my desk and opened my calendar, scrolling through upcoming events. When my eyes reached Saturday's booking, I froze. Hunter Hayes engagement, Harbor Light Santa Monica Grand Ballroom, my hotel. The irony was almost funny. My sister's fancy engagement, the one I wasn't fit to attend, was happening inside a property I owned. A small laugh escaped me, dry more disbelief than amusement. For a moment, I leaned back in my chair, torn between anger and curiosity. I could have called the manager and canceled their reservation. I could have walked away and spent the weekend at my Malibu property, ignoring the whole thing. But part of me, the quiet part that had learned patience in boardrooms and construction sites, wanted to see it for myself. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about observation. I wanted to see how far they'd gone building this fantasy of who they thought they were, perfect, polished above me. I glanced at the clock. 8:07 a.m. If I went, no one would recognize me not dressed like myself. I'd just be another worker in the background, and honestly, that sounded like freedom. I walked to my bedroom closet, flipping through rows of tailored blazers, silk blouses, and high-end heels. Too sharp. Too obvious. My fingers stopped at a pair of old jeans, soft from age, and a white linen shirt I hadn't worn since the early days of the first hotel renovation. It smelled faintly of salt and detergent. I added worn-in sneakers, gray scuffed, comfortable. On the dresser, my gold watch and a slim diamond bracelet caught the sunlight. I hesitated, then unbuckled the watch and laid it next to the bracelet. The symbols of everything I'd earned didn't belong where I was going. I tied my hair back in a loose ponytail and looked at my reflection. Not a CEO, just a woman. The phone buzzed again. A message from Marcus, my general manager. Morning, Clara. Final confirmation, Hunter Hayes. Event 6 p.m. Everything's set, I typed back quickly. Thanks, Marcus. Don't mention my name to anyone. I'm taking the day off. He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Nothing more. He knew better than to ask questions. The apartment felt smaller now, filled with echoes of what I didn't say on that phone call with Mom. I thought about the years spent being the serious one, the one who fixed problems quietly, while Lily shined under the family spotlight. She'd been the darling. The pretty one, the social one, the one who always fit in, and maybe in her mind, I was the shadow she didn't want at her party. But this time the story would play out differently. I grabbed my keys wallet and a pair of sunglasses. Before locking the door, I took one last look around. The framed photos of hotel openings, employees smiling, my team clapping as we cut ribbons in Seattle, San Diego, Portland. Proof that I belonged somewhere, even if not in their eyes. As I turned the key, my chest tightened, not from anger, but from the quiet determination that had carried me this far. My voice, calm, steady, not bitter, filled the silence as I whispered, I'm not going for revenge. I just want to see how far they've gone, pretending they're better than me. I slipped the phone into my pocket and stepped into the hallway. The morning air outside smelled of coffee and sea breeze. Somewhere down the street, traffic hummed and gulls called above the rooftops. I breathed in, straightened my shoulders, and started walking toward the hotel that bore my name, not as a guest, not as an owner, but as someone who had nothing left to prove. The day had already started without me, but by tonight it would end on my terms. The morning light hit the glass doors of Harbor Light Santa Monica like gold. I parked my old silver sedan at the side lot tucked between a catering van and a dumpster, the kind of spot where no one would bother to look twice. Guests in silk and tailored suits were already arriving out front, stepping out of black town cars that gleamed like oil. Their laughter floated in the air, sharp and rehearsed. I pulled my sunglasses off and shoved them into my pocket, my sneakers crunching on the gravel as I crossed the back of the property. For a second, I almost went toward the main lobby just to feel that polished marble floor under my feet. But then I stopped. I didn't want recognition or even acknowledgement. I wanted perspective. Before I could take another step, a voice called out, brisk but polite. "Excuse me, ma'am." I turned and saw a young man, early 20s, uniform, freshly pressed security badge shining under the sun. He looked nervous, like he was still memorizing the rules. "This entrance is for guests only," he said, straightening his tie. "I'm here for the Hayes Hunter engagement," I told him. He scanned me from head to toe, eyes landing on my jeans, my plain white shirt, my scuffed sneakers. Sure," he said after a pause. "But deliveries and staff enter through the service entrance. It's around the back." He pointed down a narrow walkway beside the dumpsters, the smell of bleach and citrus faint in the air. I could have shown him my ID, the one that read CEO, Harbor Light Resorts. I could have watched the blood drain from his face as he realized who he was talking to, but that wasn't why I was here, so I smiled lightly. "Of course. Thank you." He nodded, relieved to have done his job correctly, and turned back to the front doors. I walked the way he'd pointed, sneakers squeaking against the concrete. The path was shaded, cluttered with metal carts, crates of wine bottles, and the occasional cigarette butt from someone's stolen break. When I pushed open the heavy gray service door, a wave of heat and noise rolled over me. Sizzling pans shouted orders, the rhythmic slam of oven doors. The kitchen was alive, chaotic, perfect. The air smelled of garlic champagne butter and adrenaline. A tall sous chef with a sharp accent barked, "You apron, we're behind on shrimp." Before I could respond, an apron came flying toward me. I caught it midair. "Got it," I said automatically. The man barely looked at me again. He was already yelling at someone else about plating. I tied the apron around my waist, stepping into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The energy of people who worked because things had to get done. I joined a line of kitchen staff peeling shrimp at the long steel counter. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and quick hands hummed under her breath as she worked. "You knew?" she asked, glancing sideways at me. "Something like that." "Lucky you," she said. "You missed the morning chaos. The bride's been driving everyone nuts. Changed the flower order 3 times. Across from us, a younger guy piped up. And her mother-in-law complained the champagne wasn't pale enough. Said it looked cheap." Someone snorted from the prep table. "It's champagne, not paint." The group laughed low and tired. I kept my head down, my knife moving rhythmically as I deveined another shrimp. The metallic scent of shellfish mixed with lemon cleaner filled the air. "Lily." "I thought, what kind of circus have you built?" For a moment, I drifted back to childhood. Mom at the stove, me chopping vegetables. Lily standing nearby in a party dress she refused to stain. "You'll smell like onions," she'd said once, nose wrinkling. I'd laughed then, but right now the memory burned a little. "Hey, careful with those hands," the woman next to me said, nudging me lightly. "You're working like you're mad at the shrimp." I blinked, realizing I'd been gripping the knife too tightly. "Guess I'm out of practice." She smiled. "Don't worry, nobody's really here for the shrimp anyway. They're here for the drama." She was right. I just didn't know how right yet. After 20 minutes, the rhythm of the kitchen became almost meditative. The clatter, the shouting, the music of motion. For once, I wasn't the boss. I wasn't in charge. I was just part of the noise. It was strangely freeing. "Where's the extra tray?" someone yelled. By the fridge, another answered. I moved to grab a tray, brushing past a waiter carrying champagne glasses. He stopped near the door, whispering to another waiter. Their voices were hushed, but I caught my name. "The sister," one of them said. "She's not even invited. Too plain," they said. The words hit harder than I expected. I kept walking, set the tray down, and focused on wiping my hands with a towel. My jaw tightened, but I didn't look up. I'd spent years learning how to keep my face calm when someone tried to put me in a box. I exhaled slowly, staring at the shrimp shells scattered across the counter. Too plain. Maybe plain was better than being hollow. "Hey, you okay?" the woman beside me asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just thinking." She shrugged. "We all think too much in this place. Better to just keep your head down." I smiled faintly. "That's the plan." When the last tray was filled, I rinsed my hands under hot water, the smell of lemon soap cutting through everything else. I watched the steam rise and thought about how easy it would have been to leave, to walk out the service door and drive away. No one would even know I'd been here. But that wasn't what today was about. I dried my hands, untied the apron, and looked around the kitchen. The same place that fed hundreds of guests each night, but never got seen, never got credit. That was the heart of every luxury. The invisible ones made it shine. I pressed my palms to the counter, feeling the cool metal under my skin. "Not out of spite," I whispered to myself. "Just curiosity." Then I grabbed a tray of champagne flutes and headed for the door leading to the ballroom. I wanted to see how their perfect little world looked up close, and what it took to keep it from falling apart. As I stepped through the swinging door, the roar of the kitchen faded behind me, replaced by laughter and the clink of crystal glasses. The contrast hit like stepping into another universe. I squared my shoulders, took a slow breath, and moved toward the noise, ready to see the show. The air outside the kitchen was cooler, quieter, a sharp contrast to the chaos I'd just left. I slipped down the hallway that ran behind the ballroom, the one most guests never noticed. The faint hum of conversation bled through the walls, soft music floating above it. Through the glass panels of the service corridor, I could see everything. The glittering chandeliers, the champagne towers, the laughter that sounded like it had been rehearsed. It was like watching a play I'd already seen too many times. The smiles too bright, the compliments too polished. My family loved a good performance. Near the stage, Lily stood in the center of it all, radiant in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my first hotel loan payment. She was barking orders like a director on opening night. "Don't mix the rosé and the brut." "Mom, can you tell them to keep the lights warmer? I look pale under cool tones." Evelyn hovered beside her, laughing nervously, smoothing a strand of Lily's hair that didn't need fixing. "Sweetheart, everything looks beautiful. Relax." Next to them, Victoria Hunter stood like royalty, her posture straight, expression calm, a soft smile that somehow managed to feel like a threat. "It's all lovely, dear," she said smoothly. "Let's just make sure no one embarrasses us." The words rolled out of her mouth, coated in sugar, but they landed heavy. Evelyn chuckled awkwardly as if to agree. Lily nodded too eagerly, desperate to please her future mother-in-law. "Embarrasses us." The phrase echoed in my head. The irony almost made me laugh. "You've done that job for me for years," I thought. I watched from the shadows, my reflection faint in the glass. Just a blurred outline of someone who didn't belong. A hotel technician hurried by, holding a small soundboard, wires coiled over his shoulder. Victoria caught his arm with the practiced confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Excuse me," she said sweetly, handing him a sealed envelope. I couldn't hear everything, but the tone told me enough. Clipped, commanding. "You'll know when to play it," she said. "Wait for my signal." The man hesitated. "Ma'am, I'm not sure." Victoria leaned closer, voice low but sharp. "You'll know," she repeated. Then she smiled that cold, perfect smile of hers. He nodded, nervous, tucking the envelope into his pocket before walking off. Something wasn't right. I straightened, following quietly, as the technician disappeared through the maintenance door leading to the sound booth. My heart wasn't racing out of fear. It was the kind of focus that came right before closing a deal. Years in boardrooms had trained me for moments like this, reading people, predicting moves, waiting for them to make mistakes. I slipped through the same door, keeping my pace measured steps light against the tile floor. The hallway curved toward the staff elevators, and there they were, Victoria and a man in a tailored navy suit whispering near the wall. She had that same rehearsed calmness, like she was dictating terms of a contract she'd already decided on. Her voice carried just enough for me to hear the shape of her words. "Once the audio plays," she murmured, "everything will fall apart. The girl won't recover from that." The man nodded, his hands clasped behind his back. "And the son, Michael, will understand in time. He deserves better than her." My stomach tightened. The realization came in pieces. Whatever was on that USB or sound file, it wasn't harmless. Victoria was planning something that would ruin Lily publicly, maybe end the engagement altogether. And Lily, in all her vanity and pride, had no idea. I leaned back against the wall, hidden in the dark edge of the corridor. The laughter from the ballroom muffled through the walls, cheerful and cruelly unaware. For a brief second, I wondered if I should stop it. Lily might not deserve my loyalty, but she didn't deserve this either. Not like this. Then another thought cut through. They're standing in my house. Victoria had no idea that the walls around her, the chandeliers above her, the marble beneath her heels, every inch of this hotel belonged to the woman she thought was a nobody. A slow calm settled over me. Not the fiery kind of anger that makes you lash out. This was colder, steadier. The kind that sits in your chest like steel. I moved back toward the service corridor, slipping behind a floral partition, where I could still see the ballroom. The staff was setting up the final touches. Candles being lit, waiters adjusting silverware, photographers testing flashes. Everything gleamed. Lily was laughing with Michael now, pretending everything was perfect. She didn't notice Victoria's eyes narrowing across the room, calculating every second until her plan unfolded. I folded my arms, watching them. There was a part of me that wanted to storm in, tell Lily what was coming, maybe even save her from herself. But another part, the one that remembered every family dinner where I was the afterthought, told me to wait. Revenge doesn't need fireworks. It just needs timing. If Victoria wanted a show, I'd let her stage it herself. I'd let her dig the hole, lower herself into it, and smile while she did it. The lights dimmed slightly as guests began to take their seats. The pianist started playing soft jazz, the air thick with perfume and champagne bubbles. I stepped farther into the shadows, blending into the quiet hum of servers moving trays. Somewhere, deep inside, I could feel the faintest pulse of anticipation. Not excitement. Control. The night was still young, and every act of their little performance would unfold under my roof on my terms. I adjusted my apron, exhaled slowly, and thought, let them play their parts. I'll be right here behind the curtain watching. The ballroom shimmered under 1,000 tiny lights. Everything glowed, gold ivory champagne tones cascading across the walls, like a soft filter from an old Hollywood film. A string quartet played near the staircase, their bows moving in perfect unison. Waiters glided through the room carrying silver trays, and the air was thick with perfume money and ego. I slipped through the crowd with a tray of champagne glasses balanced on my palm. The sound of my sneakers was swallowed by the chatter and the music. People brushed past without seeing me. Not really. That kind of invisibility used to sting. Tonight it felt powerful. I could move freely, observe everything. I didn't need to belong. I owned the stage they were standing on. At the center of the room, Victoria Hunter stood like she'd been carved from glass. Her posture flawless, her tone dripping with entitlement. Our family's been hosting events since before half these hotels existed, she said, her laugh soft and rehearsed. The small circle of guests around her, mostly women with pearl earrings and frozen smiles, laughed too eager to echo her confidence. I felt the familiar flicker of irritation, then control. This was what power looked like when it needed an audience. Across the room, Lily stood with Michael smiling too hard, clutching his arm like it was armor. Her laugh rang high and thin, almost desperate. For a second, our eyes met. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe she saw me and decided not to. Her gaze slid right past me, and she turned her face toward a guest pretending to listen. A soft ache pulsed in my chest, but it didn't last long. You made your choice, I thought. You always did. I wove through the clusters of guests, replacing empty flutes with full ones. A man in a tuxedo nodded at me, without actually looking, as if I were just part of the decor. Somewhere behind me, someone said I heard her sister didn't even show up. The irony almost made me laugh. Near the bar, I noticed Ethan Hunter, Victoria's younger son. Late 20s slick hair, the kind of confidence that comes from never having earned a single thing. He was leaning against a marble column, phone in hand, pretending to look busy but scanning the room for attention. When his gaze landed on me, I knew before he opened his mouth what was coming. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, lowering his voice like he thought it was charming. "You working all night, or do you get a break?" I kept my expression neutral. "Until the job's done." He grinned. "Hard worker. I like that." He reached into his wallet, slipped a crisp $100 bill onto my tray and leaned closer. "Find me later, we could talk business." His cologne hit first. Too sweet, too expensive, trying too hard. I met his eyes for half a second and smiled, the kind of smile that ends conversations. "Sure," I said lightly, turning away before he could say another word. As I walked off, I whispered under my breath, "Business, kid. I could buy your entire crypto portfolio twice over." The thought almost made me laugh. I headed toward the bar to drop off the used flutes, and Marcus Lane, the general manager, was standing there in his usual immaculate suit, clipboard in hand, overseeing the service staff. His eyes swept the room, efficient and calm, until he saw me. For a moment, his face flickered with surprise. Then, understanding, he took a half step forward. "Everything all right, Ms.?" I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not yet," I murmured, keeping my voice low. He froze mid-sentence, the corner of his mouth tightening into a near smile. "Understood," he said, his tone instantly professional again. I set the tray on the counter. "Keep the system logs secure," I added quietly. "And, Marcus, make sure the sound booth's under watch." He nodded once. "Already done." Good. I didn't need anyone meddling before the truth revealed itself. As I turned to rejoin the crowd, I felt eyes on me. Ethan again, lounging near the bar, now watching my exchange with Marcus. The smirk on his face told me exactly what he thought he'd seen. He lifted his glass slightly as if to toast me, then mouthed something like, "Didn't know you had connections." I ignored him, but part of me wanted to laugh out loud. If only he knew. From my vantage point near the back of the ballroom, I could see the entire event moving like clockwork. The string quartet shifted to a slower piece. Waiters circled, refilling glasses. Photographers adjusted their lenses, snapping picture after picture of people who lived for moments like this. Victoria was in her element. Every movement deliberate, every glance a performance. She drifted between tables, whispering to guests, adjusting floral arrangements herself, as though she owned the place. Lily followed her every step. Smiling, nodding, trying too hard. The longer I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't a family celebration. It was a transaction. Status for status, name for name. My sister had turned herself into a prop. I kept moving, weaving through the crowd like smoke, listening. Conversations drifted around me, talk of mergers, golf courses, art auctions. Who bought, which vacation home. None of it mattered. I stopped near the mirrored column by the center aisle, pretending to adjust the champagne glasses on my tray. In the reflection, I could see Victoria glancing toward the sound booth at the far end of the room. Her expression didn't change, but her hand brushed her bracelet. A subtle signal. The technician nodded once. My heart ticked faster, but not out of fear. Everything was aligning. Marcus caught my eye across the room. His calm nod told me he'd seen it too. The game had started. I took a breath and scanned the crowd one last time. Lily was laughing again, but the sound cracked slightly at the edges. Michael looked distracted, his gaze flicking toward his phone. Victoria smiled as if nothing was wrong. The chandeliers sparkled above them all. Bright, perfect, blinding. I adjusted the tray on my hand, the stem of a flute pressing cold against my palm. They had no idea whose house they were standing in. Ethan raised his glass again, winking as if we shared a secret. He thought I was flirting with the manager. He thought I was just another faceless server waiting for a tip. I let him keep his illusion. He'd regret that smirk later. For now, the music swelled, the lights dimmed a little, and I slipped further into the background. The mask was still on, but the cracks had started to show, and I was right where I needed to be. The elevator doors slid open on the 5th floor with a quiet hum. The noise from the ballroom below was gone now, replaced by the low, steady buzz of fluorescent lights. The hallway stretched out in both directions, empty and echoing. My footsteps sounded too loud against the polished tile. I'd always loved this part of the hotel after hours. The calm, the control. No guests, no noise, just stillness and power. I walked to the end of the corridor, where the frosted glass door read Executive Suite, authorized personnel only. The sensor blinked green when I pressed my thumb to the scanner. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt, the custom scent I'd approved 2 years ago when we redesigned the Harbor Light brand. The office hadn't changed since I was last here. Glass walls framed the view of the Pacific, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. My desk sat near the window bare, except for a few folders, a sleek monitor, and a half-finished cup of water. Everything was where I'd left it, precise and quiet. I sat down, letting the silence wrap around me. The city lights outside flickered on the glass, mixing with the glow from my screens. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before opening the security system. Rows of live camera feeds popped up. The ballroom, the kitchen, the loading dock, the sound booth. And there she was. Victoria Hunter. Elegant, even from a distance, was slipping that same USB into the technician's hand again. The feed zoomed enough to catch the movement, the glint of cash folded inside the envelope. I leaned closer, taking a still shot. Proof. Got you, I whispered under my breath. Switching feeds. I pulled up the network hub that controlled the sound system. Every event file, every audio cue, every playlist came up in a clean list. My eyes caught the one labeled Speech Mix, MP3. The timestamp showed it had been uploaded just 20 minutes earlier. I hesitated, my pulse steady but sharp. Then I double-clicked the file. The recording started faintly, the background noise of a hotel ballroom. Then came Lily's voice, or something close to it. "They're marrying into us for money," the voice said, dripping arrogance. "Michael's family is ancient but broke. The name is all they have left." I felt my jaw tighten as the audio looped, each sentence perfectly spliced together. No hesitation, no breath. It wasn't Lily's tone, not exactly, but it was close enough that anyone who heard it would believe it. If this played during the toast, her reputation would be finished. Not just socially, professionally. Even the Hunters wouldn't survive the scandal. I hit stop and sat back staring at the screen. You deserve some humility, Lily, I thought. But not this. For all the years she'd treated me like an afterthought, for all the times she'd hidden my success from others, she was still my sister. I wasn't going to let someone else destroy her just to feel powerful. I closed the audio file and opened a new one. A clean sound capture I'd recorded earlier from the security feed. Victoria's voice filled the quiet office. "She's not fit for our family. I'll make sure this engagement never happens." Her tone was icy, surgical. It was the kind of statement that would be impossible to twist or explain away. I didn't even need to edit it. Her own arrogance had done the work for me. I deleted the original speech mix, MP3, and replaced it with the new clip. The file name stayed the same. No one would notice the change until it was too late. A small smirk touched my lips. Not satisfaction, just precision. I checked the clock, 6:30 p.m. The speeches would start at 7. 30 minutes. I grabbed my phone and typed a message to Marcus. "Do not touch the sound system. Wait for my signal." He replied almost instantly. "Understood. You good?" I typed back. "Better than good." The message sent, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. The soft hum of the building filled the silence, the heartbeat of something I'd built from the ground up. This hotel had seen me through my worst years. The ones where I mortgaged everything, where I painted walls myself, served tables when staff didn't show. I'd learned that control doesn't mean shouting. It means timing. I opened my eyes and looked at the camera feeds again. On screen, the ballroom sparkled under the chandeliers. Guests raised their glasses. Servers circulated the music, swelled. It was a flawless illusion. Wealth pretending to be class. In the corner of the feed, I saw Lily on stage, adjusting her dress, trying to look perfect. Evelyn hovered near her, fussing, smiling too brightly. Victoria watched them both from a nearby table, calm and certain that she'd already won. A flicker of pity crossed my mind, not for Victoria. She'd chosen her battlefield. But for Lily, she had no idea how close she'd come to being humiliated in front of everyone she was trying to impress. I switched the feed to the sound booth. The technician was still there, fiddling with wires, completely unaware that his task had been rewritten. He checked his watch, then the equipment, muttering something under his breath. Downstairs, servers lined up near the stage, ready to start pouring for the toast. Marcus moved through the room with that calm authority I'd hired him for, steady, observant, invisible, when he needed to be. He glanced up toward the camera, as if he knew I was watching, and gave the faintest nod. I checked my phone again. No new messages. Good. Outside, the last traces of daylight were slipping below the horizon. The reflection of the ocean shimmered against the glass walls of my office. The city stretched beyond it, glittering indifferent. I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my shirt. My reflection in the window stared back, not the version Lily had always dismissed, but the woman who owned the building where their charade was taking place. The faintest smile crept up as I whispered, "Showtime." I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked toward the elevator. 30 minutes to curtain. The trap was set, and all I had to do now was let it spring itself. When the elevator doors closed around me, I looked up at the ceiling light, my pulse calm, my breathing even. The quiet hum of the elevator filled the small space as I descended toward the party. Control wasn't about power, it was about patience. And tonight, patience was the sharpest weapon I had. By the time I reached the edge of the ballroom, the lights had shifted to a soft amber glow. The waitstaff were clearing the last cocktail glasses, and the guests were settling into their seats. A hush fell over the room, that heavy quiet before a performance begins. Lily stood on the small stage hands, gripping the microphone like it was the only solid thing in the world. The spotlights framed her face, catching the shimmer of her dress. Her voice trembled, but she smiled anyway. "Thank you all for coming," she said, began, her tone rehearsed and breathy. "I've dreamed of this day since I met Michael." Applause scattered softly through the crowd. Michael smiled up at her from the front table, but something in his expression seemed tight, uncertain. Evelyn sat beside him, dabbing her eyes, soaking in the moment like she was living it herself. From the far end of the room, I saw Victoria Hunter give a small nod toward the sound booth. It was a movement so subtle, most would have missed it. But I'd been watching for it. The technician tapped a button on his control pad. The speakers hummed faintly. Then it began. A woman's voice filled the ballroom, crisp and clear. But it wasn't Lily's. "We'll end this tonight," the voice said coldly. "That girl's not good enough. Not for my son. Not for this family." For half a heartbeat, no one reacted. It was as if the air itself had stopped moving. Then gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a low wave of whispers. Chairs creaked. Michael turned sharply toward his mother, his face blanching. "Mom," he said, disbelief cutting through the noise. Victoria's face drained of color. "That's fake," she snapped. "It's edited." Her voice carried across the room, sharp enough to sting. She looked toward the sound booth, pointing a trembling finger. "Turn that off." "That's not real." But it didn't stop. The audio kept playing, crystal clear, her own voice continuing more damning with every sentence. "I'll make sure this engagement never happens. My son won't marry beneath him." Every word was her own. Michael stood, his chair scraping loudly against the marble. "Mom, what the hell is this?" The room was unraveling, whispers turning into murmurs, murmurs into open stares. Evelyn sat frozen. Her hands clamped around her glass. Lily's microphone clattered to the floor as she stared at Victoria, her face, pale eyes wide. I felt my heartbeat slow, steady, like everything had clicked into place. The room was finally seeing what had been there all along. Victoria tried again, her composure cracking. "This is some kind of trick. Who's responsible for this?" Marcus stepped forward from the back of the room, his voice calm and level. "Mrs. Hunter, our cameras recorded everything. You bribed a technician earlier this evening. It's all on file. You'll regret this," she barked, spinning toward him. "Who do you think you're talking to?" A quiet voice answered behind her. "Your host." Every head turned. I stepped forward from the aisle, still in my catering uniform, holding a small remote in my hand. For a second, the world was soundless except for the faint hum of the projector screens powering on. Victoria stared at me, confusion flashing across her face. Who are you? She demanded. Clara Hayes, I said evenly, owner of Harborlight Resorts. This building, these walls this evening, all of it belongs to me. A ripple moved through the crowd. People shifted, whispered. Evelyn's mouth fell open, eyes flicking between me and Lily. Lily's voice was a whisper barely audible. Clara. I met Victoria's eyes and said, You wanted a show. Now you've got one. I pressed the remote. The monitors on the ballroom walls flickered to life, switching from the slideshow of engagement photos to live security footage. The entire room watched as the screen showed Victoria earlier that evening, slipping the envelope of cash to the technician, leaning in close, whispering. Her own voice played again, echoing across the marble. You'll know when to play it. Wait for my signal. Someone in the back gasped. Phones came out of purses and jacket pockets. Recording, documenting. Guests whispered to one another, hungry for the kind of drama money couldn't buy. Turn it off! Victoria shouted, her voice breaking. This is illegal. You can't do this. Marcus's tone stayed polite but firm. Actually, you signed a release acknowledging the use of internal security systems when you booked the venue. Everything recorded tonight is the property of Harborlight Resorts. Her jaw dropped, but no sound came out. Lily stepped down from the stage, trembling mascara streaking under her eyes. You tried to humiliate me, she said, her voice cracking. You wanted to destroy me. Victoria opened her mouth, but the words never formed. Michael ran a hand through his hair, disbelief twisting his features. Mom! How could you? Victoria turned toward him. Desperation creeping into her voice. I did it for you. For this family. She's not one of us. That's enough, he said quietly, stepping back. I stayed where I was. Watching it unfold, there was no satisfaction. No triumph, just a sense of balance, like a weight shifting into place. Someone near the front began clapping. Slow, uncertain. Others followed. Not applause for me or for Lily, but the kind of uncomfortable noise people make when they don't know what else to do. Victoria froze, her face tightening like glass about to crack. Then she grabbed her purse from the table and stormed toward the exit. Cameras flashed as she passed. Michael didn't follow. The chaos swelled. Guests standing, murmuring, recording, pretending to be shocked, while secretly thrilled to witness the downfall of the woman who'd spent years looking down on them. I stayed silent, letting the noise roll around me. I'd seen this kind of collapse before. In business meetings, negotiations, marriages, pride always fell the same way loudly. Then, all at once, Evelyn approached me slowly, her voice trembling. Clara, you own this place. Yes, I said simply. Her mouth opened, then closed again. There was nothing left to say. Across the room, Lily stood staring at the screens, at the fragments of the mother-in-law she'd idolized. Her shoulders sagged, all that polished confidence gone. When her eyes finally met mine, there was no anger, only shame. I didn't move toward her, not yet. The string quartet had stopped playing. The only sound was the whisper of voices, and the faint pop of a champagne cork somewhere in the back. Victoria's footsteps echoed out through the lobby until the doors shut behind her, cutting the noise like a blade. I stood still, the remote still warm in my hand, and watched the monitors go black one by one. For the first time all night, I felt calm. Not joy, not revenge, just a quiet release. Closure doesn't roar. It exhales. And in that moment, I finally breathed. The sound of whispered shock rippled through the ballroom like static. People began clustering in little groups, murmuring their words overlapping. Fragments of disbelief, gossip, pity. Did you hear what she said? Was that real? That poor girl. The champagne sparkle of the night had gone flat, replaced with a bitter taste that hung in the air. Lily still stood frozen near the stage, pale, and shaking the microphone at her feet. Her lipstick had smudged slightly at the corner, her perfect image cracking like glass under pressure. Michael reached for her hand, voice low but trembling. Lily, it's okay, we'll figure this out. She pulled away, eyes wide, unfocused. This can't be happening, she whispered, staring at nothing. This can't. Across the room, Victoria tried to regain control. Her voice, sharp and brittle, cut through the murmurs. Everyone, calm down. This is ridiculous. It's all fake. She was panting slightly, her composure slipping with every syllable. She turned toward me, fury twisting her features. "Who are you to interfere in my family's affairs? You'll be fired for this stunt." I took a slow step closer, every movement deliberate. "Fired," I said softly, just loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "That's an interesting threat to make. To your host." The words landed like a quiet slap. A few guests turned to look at her, confusion flickering on their faces. Her eyes narrowed. "You're lying." I tilted my head slightly, keeping my tone even. "Try me." For the first time that evening, she didn't seem sure of herself. The silence stretched until Marcus appeared at my side, his calm presence like an anchor. He held a folder in one hand, his voice steady and professional. "Mrs. Hunter de Bagas, there's another matter we need to address. The payment for this event hasn't cleared. Your check was returned this morning. We've contacted your bank twice." A collective gasp fluttered through the room like wind in curtains. Lily spun toward her mother, confusion etched deep across her face. "What? You said—" "Mom said the deposit was handled." Evelyn tried to step forward, voice trembling. "I'm sure it's just a mistake, maybe. But," Victoria snapped, "we don't discuss finances in public." Her tone was venomous, sharp enough to make Evelyn flinch. I folded my arms, my patience thinning. "Maybe you should," I said. My voice didn't rise, but it cut cleanly through the noise. This entire event was funded on lies, just like everything else tonight. That stopped them. The whispers faded, replaced by uneasy quiet. At the bar, the Hunter's lawyer, a silver-haired man who'd been watching everything in silence, quietly rose from his seat and slipped out through the side door. A few people noticed and their eyes followed him. Whispers starting again. The cracks in the perfect picture were widening fast. Victoria's face reddened. She hissed through clenched teeth. "You're just staff. You have no idea who you're talking to." Marcus turned slightly toward me, waiting for a signal. I caught his eye and gave a small shake of my head. "Not yet. Let her talk. Let her dig." Victoria pointed at me again, her hand trembling. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my family? My guests, Your guests are already leaving," I interrupted quietly. It was true. Around the room, people were standing up, gathering purses and jackets, muttering their goodbyes. Some avoided looking at her altogether. Others lingered, pretending to be concerned, but clearly savoring the scene. Victoria's breathing quickened. "This is slander," she spat. "You'll hear from my attorney." "Then I suggest you pay him with something that doesn't bounce," Marcus said evenly. For a moment, I thought she might actually slap him. Instead, she drew in a shuddering breath and turned on her husband. "Charles, we're leaving." He blinked, dazed and defeated. "Victoria, now." She grabbed his arm, dragging him toward the exit. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble, the sound echoing across the ballroom like gunshots. Guests parted to make room, watching silently as she stormed out. The glass doors swung open, spilling cold night air into the room as the Hunters disappeared down the hallway. A few seconds later, someone laughed nervously. A thin, strained sound, and others joined uneasy chuckles, filling the space where the music used to be. The party was collapsing in real time. The quartet sat motionless in the corner, unsure whether to play or pack up. Michael stood motionless near the front, rubbing the back of his neck, shame and disbelief etched on his face. He didn't look at Lily. Evelyn was the first to break the silence. She turned to me, voice small trembling. "Clara, what have you done?" I met her eyes, what no one else had the courage to. Her expression faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, words dying before they reached the air. I turned to Marcus. "Let them finish the night," I said quietly. "People should see who they really are when the lights go out." He nodded once, understanding. Servers began clearing half-finished glasses. The laughter died down again. Guests who hadn't left yet stood in small circles whispering, replaying what they'd seen. I could hear bits of it. The hotel owner, the mother-in-law, the recording. It didn't matter what they said. The truth had already sunk its teeth into the room. From the far corner, Lily sat down heavily, her body trembling, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She just stared at the stage at the microphone lying on the floor, the one she'd dropped when her life had tilted sideways. Evelyn moved toward her, but Lily didn't seem to notice. Michael stood frozen, his jaw clenched, eyes on the door where his parents had vanished. The chandeliers above flickered slightly, one bulb burning out with a faint pop. It was small, almost imperceptible, but for some reason it made everything feel final. Guests began filing out in twos and threes, voices hushed, eyes wide, some still recording as they walked. The ballroom emptied slowly like water draining from a glass. When the last song ended and the lights dimmed again, I was still standing there watching it all unravel. The perfect night had fallen apart piece by piece, and yet the truth, the full, raw truth, was still hovering just below the surface, waiting to finish its work. I glanced once at Marcus, who stood near the back clipboard in hand, calm as ever. He caught my eye, and for the first time that evening, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. The game wasn't over yet, but the masks had come off, and no one could put them back on again. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me away from the chaos below. The silence on the ride up felt almost heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. When I stepped onto the 5th floor, the hum of the ballroom had vanished completely, replaced by the quiet pulse of machinery and distant city noise. I walked down the hallway to my office heels, echoing softly on the tile. The glass door closed behind me with a faint click. Beyond the windows, Los Angeles glowed against the dark ocean, a sprawl of lights and movement that never seemed to rest. Inside, though, it was still. My laptop waited on the desk screensaver, pulsing. I sat down and unlocked it, pulling up the security system again. The camera feeds rolled across the monitor like the final act of a show I'd already seen. Waiters stacking dishes, the last of the guests filing out the ballroom, slowly returning to its bones. On one screen, Lily sat at a corner table. Her dress wrinkled, her mascara streaked. Evelyn hovered beside her, rubbing her shoulder, whispering words I couldn't hear. Victoria was gone. I exhaled, then minimized the feed and opened a new window. One by one, I attached the files. The footage of Victoria handing over the envelope, the audio clip of her plotting the bounced payment notification from the hunter's account. Each upload bar crawled forward blue against the dark. When the last file finished, I dialed Detective Rachel Kim's number from memory. She picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and clear through the speakerphone. "Detective Kim." "It's Clara Hayes," I said. "Harbor Light Resorts." I could hear her chair creak as she sat up. "I was hoping you'd call back. Do you still have the material we discussed? I just sent it. Check your inbox. It's everything you need." A few seconds of silence passed while she reviewed the attachments. Then, "You recorded all this tonight, yes?" Her tone shifted, no longer skeptical, now focused. "This matches our open fraud case. The hunters have been on our radar for months. You just handed us everything we needed." "I'm not looking for credit," I said quietly. "Just accountability." "Then you'll get it," she replied. "We'll issue the warrants by morning. You've done the right thing, Ms. Hayes." The call ended with a soft click. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the city outside. A soft layer of fog had started to roll in over the coast, blurring the skyline. My reflection on the glass looked almost unfamiliar. Calm, composed, but older somehow. Revenge always takes something from you. I could feel that truth settling deep in my chest. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Marcus Media's here, reporter filming guests leaving. I allowed myself a small smile. "Perfect timing," I murmured. Down on the security feed, I switched to the exterior cameras. A crowd had gathered near the valet entrance. Local journalists, a few curious pedestrians, and more than one party guest trying to slip away without being seen. Julia Parker. A reporter from the local station stood near the curb, her camera crew rolling as she spoke into the mic. I couldn't hear her words, but I could guess the headline, "Uninvited Sister Owns the Hotel." I could already imagine it spreading across social media before dawn. It wasn't what I'd planned, but I wasn't about to stop it either. On another camera, I saw Lily again. She was sitting alone now, the party staff moving around her. She was small against the expanse of the ballroom. A woman surrounded by flowers that no longer looked celebratory. I felt a flicker of something close to sympathy, sharp and brief. You can't grow without pain, I thought. Maybe this was what she needed to see the truth. About herself, about all of them. I closed the laptop, stood, and made my way back to the elevator. The ride down was slow, the soft hum of the machinery steady like breathing. When the doors opened onto the service level, the air was cooler, filled with the smell of cleaning supplies and metal. In the kitchen, the noise had faded to a low murmur. The staff were scrubbing counters, stacking trays, resetting for the next event. Life moved on here faster than anywhere else. Maya Lopez, the young waitress from earlier, the one Lily had snapped at, was still wiping down the long steel prep tables. Her movements were tired, but precise. She looked up when she saw me, recognition flickering across her face. "You can clock out early," I told her. "You did well today." She blinked, surprised. "I can, but there's still—" "I'll handle it," I said. She hesitated, glancing at my plain shirt, my hair pulled back, the faint traces of exhaustion that probably gave me away. "You're the owner, aren't you?" she asked quietly. I smiled. "Don't tell anyone. Just remember, kindness doesn't cost status." Her face softened. "Thank you, ma'am, for saying that." She grabbed her bag and left through the back door, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. The kitchen felt emptier now. I walked to the refrigerator, resting my hand on the cold handle, the hum of the motor steady under my fingers. My reflection shimmered faintly in the stainless steel. The same woman, but something in her eyes had shifted. The phone buzzed again on the counter. Rachel Kim's name lit the screen. I answered immediately. "Detective." I said. "We've reviewed the files," she said. "Everything checks out. The transactions, the shell companies, the fake invoices. Clara, we'll be issuing warrants by morning. You just changed how this story ends." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Good. You all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired. Get some rest." "Ms. Hayes, we'll handle the rest." The line went dead. I set the phone down slowly, my hand still on the cool surface of the fridge. For the first time that night, I let myself feel it. The weight of it all. The chaos, the justice, the loneliness of knowing I'd done the right thing, but not the easy one. The hum of the kitchen filled the silence. I stared at my reflection again, tired eyes, calm face, the faintest hint of a smile ghosting at the corner of my mouth. Revenge, I realized, doesn't taste sweet. It just stops the bitterness from growing. And tonight, that was enough. The morning light poured through the tall windows of Harbor Light, catching the ocean in streaks of silver and blue. From my office balcony, I could see the waves rolling gently toward the pier. Calm, steady, unaware of what had unraveled just hours ago. The hotel looked peaceful again, almost too peaceful, but the air was heavier, as if the walls still remembered everything that had been said the night before. Down in the lobby, the cleaning crews had already finished. The marble floors gleamed, the scent of disinfectant faint in the air. Nothing left of the chaos. No spilled champagne, no whispers, no masks. Just silence. I was walking toward the front desk when I saw them. Evelyn and Richard. My mother stood rigid by the reception counter, clutching her purse like a shield. My father was beside her, quiet hands shoved into his pockets. Evelyn's expression was set. Not anger exactly, but something sharper, colder. "Clara," she said, before I could speak, her voice tight. "What you did last night. You humiliated all of us." I stopped in my tracks. The words hung between us, heavy, inevitable. "Did I said evenly, or did I just show everyone who you've all been protecting?" She blinked, startled. "You think that makes it better? You think airing our family's dirty laundry in public gives you dignity?" "I didn't make the mess," I said. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." Her face twisted. Hurt, maybe, but also disbelief. "You've always been so cold." I met her eyes, "and you've always mistaken silence for weakness." Richard stepped forward, his voice low, tired. "Enough," he said softly. "Clara, she's just upset. It's a lot to take in." "I know, Dad," I said, my tone softening. "But pretending didn't save us then, and it won't save her now." Evelyn turned away, staring at the grand chandelier above the lobby. Her fingers tightened around her purse strap. "You've changed," she muttered. "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped needing permission to exist." The line hit harder than I intended. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my father sighed and gently took her arm. Without another word, they turned and walked toward the doors. I watched them leave, two figures fading into the sunlight outside. A strange weight pressed on my chest, but there was relief too, the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone else's approval. The echo of their footsteps disappeared. I turned toward the reception desk. Marcus was standing nearby, tablet in hand, his tie slightly loosened. He'd probably been up all night keeping things from spiraling further. He approached quietly. "The Hunters' accounts are frozen," he said. "Their lawyers are scrambling. Detective Kim confirmed charges for fraud and money laundering. They'll be served today." I nodded slowly. "Then it's over." Marcus studied me for a moment. You sure you're okay? I'm fine, I said. It was true, mostly. My body felt light, but my thoughts were heavy. You should get some rest, Marcus. He gave a small smile. You too, boss. Then he walked off toward the elevators, leaving me standing alone in the quiet. I took the stairs to the second-floor balcony that overlooked the ballroom. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, washing over the room that just hours ago had been full of laughter, deception, and the sound of lives cracking open. Now it was still, the aftermath of a storm. From above, I saw Lily sitting alone at one of the round tables, still in her wrinkled gown. The floral centerpieces around her were wilted, the air heavy with the scent of roses past their prime. She was staring at the stage at the microphone. She'd dropped, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a long moment, I just watched. She looked small, fragile, in a way I'd never seen her before. The sister who'd always lived for attention, who'd built her world on perfection, was sitting in the ruins of her own design. Evelyn's words echoed faintly in my head. You've changed. Maybe I had. I walked down the side staircase, my footsteps soft on the carpet. Lily didn't notice me at first. When I reached the edge of her table, she flinched slightly, then looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen. Morning, I said quietly. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I didn't think you'd still be here, I said. She shook her head weakly. I didn't know where else to go. Her voice cracked on the last word. Everything's gone, Clara. Michael left. Mom won't talk to me, and her... She stopped, swallowing hard. She ruined me. I didn't correct her. Not yet. For once, I didn't feel anger or triumph. I didn't feel the sharp satisfaction I thought I might. All I felt was... tired. I sat down across from her. The table between us was cluttered with half-empty glasses and wilted petals. You'll survive this, I said. It'll hurt like hell, but you'll survive. Her eyes welled again. Why did you do it? I hesitated, then answered simply. Because someone had to stop pretending. She looked away, her shoulders trembling. You can rebuild, I said softly, but only if you start being honest, with yourself, with everyone. Lily wiped at her eyes with a napkin. I don't know how. You will. I said, pain teaches faster than pride ever could. We sat there for a while, not speaking. The faint sound of waves carried in through the open balcony doors. For the first time in years, the silence between us didn't feel hostile. It just felt necessary. After a few minutes, I stood. Take the morning, I said. Then go home. We'll talk later. She looked up at me, startled. We... Yes, we. You and me. Her lips parted like she wanted to thank me, but no words came. I didn't need them. As I turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. Lily was still at the table, sunlight glinting off the crystal glass in front of her. The reflection distorted her face, making her look both older and younger at once. Like the little sister I used to know, and the woman she was still trying to become. For the first time, I didn't feel resentment, just pity, maybe even hope. Outside, the morning tide was pulling back, leaving clean lines in the sand. The hotel stood tall above it all, steady and quiet, like nothing had ever happened, though. Everything had. The ballroom looked completely different. A week had passed, and the air inside Harbor Light no longer carried the ghost of scandal. Only music, laughter, and the warm hum of people who had come together for something real. The chandeliers glowed in soft gold, casting reflections across the polished floor, where guests in formal wear mingled glasses in hand. The tables were simple this time, covered in navy and white linens, decorated with sea glass, and candles instead of imported roses. I stood near the entrance for a moment, taking it all in. The same space that had once held deceit now felt alive again, grounded, honest. A charity gala for coastal restoration, something meaningful, something that actually mattered. Marcus was at the podium, his calm, steady voice filling the room. We're proud to serve our community, he said, looking perfectly at ease. Tonight, Harbor Light isn't just a hotel. It's a reminder that rebuilding is possible inside and out. The audience applauded. He smiled, then added, and none of this would exist without the woman behind it. Ms. Clara Hayes. The applause grew louder, echoing up to the ceiling. I took a slow breath, smoothed the skirt of my navy gown, and stepped out from the back corridor. This time I entered through the main doors. The same ones I'd once been denied. The lobby lights caught the shimmer of the gown as I walked. My heels clicked lightly on the marble floor, a rhythm that matched the soft jazz playing in the background. Heads turned as I passed through the threshold, but not in judgment, in recognition. Near the doorway, Tom Reeves stood in uniform, hands folded in front of him. His expression was nervous, his cheeks flushed. When our eyes met, he straightened abruptly. "Ms. Hayes," he stammered, I'm sorry about last week." I stopped in front of him, the memory of that day flashing in my mind. His awkward attempt to direct me to the service entrance, his discomfort, my choice to say nothing. I smiled. "Tom, you were doing your job." He blinked, surprised. "Still, I should have." "Just remember," I said gently, "always look at people, not at their clothes." He nodded quickly, relief softening his face. "Yes, ma'am. I won't forget that." "Good," I said. Then added with a small grin, "Enjoy the night, Tom." I moved into the ballroom, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses wrapping around me like a warm tide. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod, the silent language of people who had been through the fire and come out stronger. A jazz trio played near the stage, the soft notes of a saxophone weaving through the air. The crowd was different tonight. Business owners, environmental partners, local officials, and even a few familiar faces from the neighborhood. It wasn't about status. It was about contribution. Julia Parker stood near the back, her camera crew discreetly filming the event. I caught a few words from her live segment as I passed by. Tonight's gala marks a new chapter for Harbor Light. Ironically, it follows the downfall of the very family that tried to use it. Her voice blended into the music, professional but tinged with quiet satisfaction. I found myself smiling. I hadn't asked her to tell that story, but she'd told it anyway. Sometimes the truth didn't need defending. It defended itself. I spent the next hour greeting guests, shaking hands, answering questions about the restoration project. Each conversation felt easy, genuine. People talked about volunteer programs, marine cleanups, grants for coastal preservation. There were no empty compliments, no veiled jabs about social class, just people trying to do good work. As the night went on, I drifted toward the tall windows overlooking the ocean. The glass reflected the glow of the ballroom, the soft light, the laughter, the movement, while beyond it the dark waves rolled under the moon. I picked up a glass of wine from a passing tray and stood there quietly for a moment. The reflection in the window showed something I hadn't realized until now. The room behind me was alive again, but this time with sincerity. People weren't performing. They were connecting. The hotel wasn't a backdrop for pretension anymore. It was a gathering place for purpose. That's what I built it for, I thought. Marcus appeared beside me, holding his own glass. "Successful night," he said. "It feels different," I replied. "It is different," he said. "You made sure of that." I watched the waves for a long moment before answering. Funny how the same room can hold both betrayal and redemption. "It just depends on what people bring into it." Marcus nodded. "You know the way this place bounced back. The staff, the guests. That's a reflection of leadership." I smiled at that, though the compliment made something inside me ache. Leadership had cost more than I wanted to admit. "Let's just say it's a reflection of lessons learned," I said. A few guests near the stage began to cheer as the fundraising counter on the projection screen climbed higher. I turned to watch as the final amount flashed. Double our goal. The room erupted in applause. Marcus raised his glass slightly toward me. "To Harbor Light," he said. "To Harbor Light," I echoed softly. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to breathe fully. The kind of breath that doesn't carry weight. The hotel hummed around me, alive, at peace. As the jazz played on, I looked back through the glass one last time. The ballroom shimmered with light, laughter rippled like music, and the ocean beyond rolled steady, endless. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was honest, and honesty, I'd learned, shines brighter than any chandelier. 2 days later, the lobby felt unusually still. The morning light spilled across the marble floor, soft and golden, catching on the edges of the reception desk, where fresh lilies, yes, lilies, sat in a vase. I hadn't chosen them. One of the staff had unknowingly turning irony into decor. I was reviewing some guest reports when I heard footsteps echo across the lobby. Hesitant, careful. When I looked up, Lily stood just past the revolving doors. No designer dress, no jewels, just a plain beige cardigan, jeans, and sneakers. Her hair was pulled into a low ponytail, her face bare of makeup. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. She stopped a few feet away, clutching her purse strap like it was the only thing holding her together. Neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt like years instead of days. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was soft, trembling. "You were right," she said. "About all of it. I didn't move. Just watched her." She swallowed hard. "I just wanted Mom to be proud." I exhaled slowly. "Mom wanted perfection," I said. "You gave her performance. There's a difference." Her eyes glistened. "I don't want to perform anymore." The words hung there, fragile and real. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. I gestured toward the reception desk. "Then start here," she blinked. "Here, we have an opening in guest relations," I said. Lily frowned slightly like she thought she'd misheard me. "You'd hire me." "No," I said, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "You'll earn it." For a moment, surprise flickered across her face. Then she nodded, biting her lip. "Okay," she whispered. "I want to try." That was all I needed to hear. By mid-afternoon, she'd filled out the application. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Marcus handled the interview. I stayed out of it, though I could hear their voices faintly through the glass wall of my office. Her tone was nervous, uncertain, but honest. When he came out, he just gave me a small nod. "She's in," he said. I watched from the balcony later that day as Lily stood behind the reception desk, with Maya Lopez learning how to check guests in and out. Her posture was straighter than I expected, her expression focused. The staff around her offered polite smiles, but kept their distance. Respect, mixed with curiosity. Then, something happened that made me pause. A guest approached the counter, frustrated about a late airport transfer. The old Lily would have rolled her eyes, blamed someone else, or tried to charm her way through it. But this version took a deep breath, listened, and handled it calmly. She apologized, arranged a car, even offered a complimentary coffee voucher. Genuine, patient human. When the guest walked away smiling, I saw Maya step over. She said something I couldn't hear, but I caught the end of it. "Thanks for apologizing earlier." Lily froze, then nodded. Her eyes shimmered, but she smiled. Small, shaky, sincere. I felt something ease inside me. Not forgiveness exactly. That takes time. But the beginning of it. A small, steady release. As I turned to leave, I thought about how strange it was that the same building that had torn everything apart was now stitching something back together. That evening, the sun dipped low over the Pacific, painting the hotel windows in amber and rose. I was in my office finishing emails when a knock sounded on the door. "Come in," I called. Daniel Brooks stepped inside. Tall, easy smile, hands tucked casually in his jacket pockets. He looked the same as he had 3 years ago when we stopped pretending timing wasn't our biggest obstacle. "I heard about the gala," he said. "About everything, actually." I smiled faintly. "News travels fast. More like wildfire," he said, grinning. Then his expression softened. "You handled this whole thing with more grace than anyone I know." I leaned back in my chair. "Grace," I said. "That's just revenge with better posture." He laughed. That low, familiar sound that used to fill my apartment in the early mornings. "You haven't changed much," he said. "Maybe not," I replied. "Maybe I just stopped hiding the parts that never needed to change." He nodded, thoughtful. "You know," he said after a pause, "if you ever want to grab dinner sometime as friends." I cut him off with a smile. "Dinner as friends sounds fine." He grinned. "Good, I'll call you." When he left, the office felt lighter, quieter, but not empty. Outside, the last of the sunset stretched across the ocean, glowing red and gold. I walked to the window, watching the reflection of the lobby below. The staff moving with calm rhythm, guests laughing softly near the bar, and Lily still behind the counter, smiling at someone with an ease I hadn't seen in years. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean forgetting. It means giving someone a chance to try again. The nightlights flickered on one by one, outlining the Harbor Light sign against the sky. The hotel looked alive. Not perfect, not untouchable, but real. And for the first time in a long time, so did we. Weeks passed, and the world spun forward as it always does. The chaos faded, replaced by headlines that belonged to someone else's downfall. On a Tuesday morning, a notification flashed across my screen. Hunter family indicted for fraud and tax evasion. Engagement canceled. Beneath it, smaller text read, "Former social elite faces multiple charges after exposure at Harbor Light Hotel." I stared at the headline for a moment, then closed the tab. I didn't need to read the details. I already knew the ending. My phone had been buzzing non-stop for days. Reporters, talk shows, magazines all wanting quotes, interviews, some even offering money for exclusives. I ignored them all. Justice wasn't a story to sell. It was just something that needed to exist. Harbor Light, meanwhile, was thriving. The scandal that had nearly torn it apart had somehow breathed new life into it. Summer bookings were through the roof, the waiting list for events stretched into next season, and the staff moved with a kind of pride I hadn't seen before. They smiled more. Guests noticed. Complaints turned into compliments. That afternoon, Marcus walked into my office, a file in hand, and that rare, easy grin on his face. "I think you should see this," he said, setting a printed report on my desk. "Occupancy's up 28%. Customer satisfaction's at 94. You've rebuilt more than a brand, Clara. You've rebuilt belief." I glanced up from the report, brow raised. Belief in what? He didn't hesitate. That decency still wins. For a moment, I just watched him, then smiled faintly. "Let's not get too sentimental, Marcus." He chuckled, tucking the file under his arm. "Too late for that." Then he left the sound of his footsteps fading down the hallway. I stood and walked to the window. The Pacific glittered under the noon sun, waves breaking in rhythmic silence. From this height, everything looked calm, steady. But I knew better. Peace is never free. It's earned, rebuilt, held together by quiet choices. My phone buzzed again on the desk. I almost ignored it until I saw the sender's name, Evelyn. The message was short. Just 5 words. "I'm proud of you, Clara." I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering above the screen. For years I'd waited for those words, long enough to imagine they'd never come. Now that they were here, they didn't feel like victory. They felt like release. I saved the message, then turned the phone face down without replying. Some conversations didn't need words anymore. Outside, the ocean breeze pushed against the glass. I took it as a reminder. Nothing stays still forever. Not tides, not wounds, not people. Through the window, I could see Lily down in the courtyard garden, her uniform neat, her hair pulled back. She was laughing with a guest pointing toward the restaurant with easy confidence. A week ago, she couldn't look anyone in the eye. Now she moved like she belonged. The view shifted slightly, and I caught a reflection of myself in the glass. I thought about all the things people had said about me over the years. Too quiet, too serious, too plain. Maybe they were right. I was never meant to blend in. I was meant to stand apart. Downstairs, the day was winding down. The staff was locking up the reception desk, stacking brochures, wiping down the counters. Lily was the last to close her station. She double-checked the drawer, smiled at Maya, and switched off the lights with a small sigh of satisfaction. I could hear their laughter drifting faintly upward, warm and real, the sound of a place finally at peace. I stepped out onto the balcony, the sea air cool against my skin. The horizon stretched wide and endless, the sunlight bouncing off the waves like scattered glass. "They thought I didn't belong here," I said quietly, almost to myself. Turns out they were the ones out of place. For a long time I stood there just listening. To the waves, to the faint hum of the city beyond, to the quiet heartbeat of the life I'd built from the ashes of what they'd tried to bury. I lifted my phone again, scrolling past the unread press messages, the invitations, the noise. Somewhere in between them was the voice that mattered most, my own, steady and unshaken. If you've ever been judged for being too simple, too quiet, or too plain, remember this: real worth doesn't need an audience. Sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge. Stay with me. There are more stories like this one. Stories where justice doesn't shout, but whispers. Where the quiet ones finally get heard,